Thank you very much, everyone who's joined us here tonight. This is our 8th week on the Liberating Cinema film series. We've had to reschedule since last week, so we're doing kind of 2 events tonight. We have the great pleasure to do a double program as for our last week. I have the great honor and pleasure to present Professor Alexander Donev, who's joining us here from Bulgaria. He'll be speaking about classical Bulgarian cinema. I hope you had the opportunity to watch the great classic film, The Goat Horn, by Metodi Andonov, which was made available to us courtesy of the Bulgarian National Film Archive and their colleagues. So I'm very grateful to introduce Professor Donev. He's a professor of screen studies at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Theatre and Film in Sofia. I'll let him speak a little bit more about himself. We'll have a talk by him on classical Bulgarian cinema, and then afterwards you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. The recording will also be online, so people can also watch who aren't able to join us immediately tonight. Hello, Professor Donev. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So, in my opinion, the term classical Bulgarian cinema is not a common definition for the Bulgarian film scholars. In my understanding, the term doesn't strictly mean a specific style, but rather a sort of best selection. The most recent such list was presented in 2015 on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the premiere of the first Bulgarian feature film shot in 1914. This happened at the Sofia International Film Festival, where in a series of screenings were featured 10 classic Bulgarian movies. One of the all-time most acclaimed Bulgarian movies, The Goat Horn, 1972, was also part of this list. I'll talk a little bit more about this movie and what exactly is its meaning in the Bulgarian film context. Of course, this list was tentative. 3 more times as many films would find place in it. Instead of listing them, I think it's more important to try to outline for you what characterized the so-called Bulgarian classic cinema. And yet, it is a period. It is associated with the time of a complete state monopoly in the film industry, which was imposed in 1948 and lasted until 1991. At the same time, the concept of a film classic implies a relative maturity of means of expression and the ability to create convincing and comprehensive images of the national character and or full-fledged depiction of contemporary society. Bulgarian cinema achieved this maturity only at the beginning of the 60s, although the first signs of such classicism are presented in Rangel Valchanov's 1958 film On the Small Island. It tells the tragic story of a group of political prisoners in the mid-1920s who planned to escape from a high-security prison located on an island in the middle of the Black Sea. From the very beginning of its constitution, Bulgarian socialist cinema has been dominated by the theme of the construction of the new socialist personality, the clash between communist values and outdated bourgeois views. This theme was stated more crudely and declaratively in the 50s, but gradually began to be realized more nuanced, more thoroughly, and at a higher artistic and professional level. The conflict between the ideal and its desecration by party officials who exploited it purely pragmatically becomes the subject of a line of dissident cinema, critical of the distortions in society and state governance. It manifested itself for the first time with the film Partizani, Life Flows Quietly by Binka Zhelyaskova and Hristo Ganev, filmed in 1957, but realized only in the late 80s. In the 60s, movies like Monday Morning, The Tied Up Balloon, The Prosecutor, and some other confirmed the trend. In the 70s, the new wave of films appeared, criticizing the overindulgence in the material, the neglect of the spiritual. It is obvious that socialism fails to achieve synchrony between the world of the big ideas and solving people's everyday domestic problems. These kinds of films are critical not so much of the common man as the system, as of the system, which does not eliminate, but on the contrary, encourages hypocrisy, selfishness, disregard of the public interest at the expense of personal gain, careerism, and a number of other flaws of public life. At the same time, the system of political leadership of culture and cinema, in particular, very often sanctions precisely those artists who openly point out the problems. It is indicative that the most critical are precisely the films of directors and writers who are convinced communists with biographies of partisans or political prisoners, which shows that they are not against ideology, but against its distortion and use of purely pragmatic, actually private interest. Along with the social critical line, Bulgarian cinema throughout the socialist period produced a number of entertaining movies aimed at the general public. In general, the awareness that cinema is a mass art that it should reach as many viewers as possible and influence them was a guiding principle for socialist film production and for the so-called classical period of Bulgarian cinema. It was under this condition of socialist film production in the early 60s that the director of Goldhorn, Metodi Andonov, entered the cinema. Historically, this particular period has another characteristic peculiarity. Gradually, it became increasingly clear that the denial of the cult of the personality of the supreme communist leader was an element of the internal struggle for power rather than a real change in the party line. That's why here it's important to emphasize that Metodi Andonov is not a dissident. His first experience as film director is in the 1965, directing a three-part TV movie based on the contemporary crime story by the Bulgarian writer Bogomil Rainov, who is very close to the communist leadership. The 33 years old at this time Andonov has already a nearly decade-long successful career as a theater director. He was a real star at the time where access to modern Austrian dramaturgy was very limited. Andonov proves his abilities as an inspired and insightful interpreter of Russian and Bulgarian dramaturgy. In his original productions, he combined the Slavic mentality with some of the theatrical principles of Bertolt Brecht, who was the only modern stage writer and director recognized at that time by the ideological censorship in Bulgaria. Andonov's film debut in the is the contemporary existential drama, The White Room, from 1968. It tells the story of a 30-year-old scholar who fights for the freedom to seek the truth in science on his own without regard for the authority of older colleagues or communist ideology. Paradoxically, the film is based again on a novel by Bogomil Rainov, known in the 50s as one of the agents of dogmatism and repression against cultural figures. The White Room was the first Bulgarian film with this type of monological structure that was trendy at the time, breaking the strict chronological sequence of the narrative, putting the emphasis on the stream of consciousness of the protagonist, a method introduced in the literature by the modern French novel and into cinema by the films of Bergman, Fellini, and Antonioni in the end of the 50s and the early 60s. His next film, There Is Nothing Better Than the Bad Weather, released 1971, was a screen adaptation of a spy novel by the same Bogomil Rainov about a Bulgarian character, a communist version of James Bond. This series of novels was published in all Eastern Bloc countries and became extremely popular, especially in the Soviet Union. Andonov proves his skills as a film director, capable of building a suspenseful plot with convincing psychological characters and original visual and editing choices. It was his ability to work on a shortened time frame efficiently and at a high artistic level that led Metodi Andonov to the realization of The Goat Horn, considered by many to be the best Bulgarian film of all time. This film appeared somehow accidentally, as even before the audience and critical success of There Is Nothing Better Than the Bad Weather, Metodi Andonov received an offer from the management of the state-owned feature film studio to make a movie based on a script he chose himself. This is a rather unconventional proposition for the socialist production system, where especially in the political climate following the events of 1968 in Czechoslovakia, every film was subject to strict examination at every stage from the initial idea to the final cut version. The reason is that at the end of the year, there were funds left in the state film studio accounting, which, if not invested in a new production, would be returned to the state budget. And this is not a good attestation for any socialist business executive. The amount was not significant, sufficient only for low budget production, which explains why all the famous director refused to take up the offer. Andonov hesitates between two stories by the Bulgarian writer Nikolai Haitov from his collection of short stories entitled Divi Raskazi, Wild Stories, published in 1967. In the end, he chose The Goat Horn. The most authoritative figure in Bulgarian literature at this time, the 60-year-old writer Emilian Stanev, had a very interesting assessment on the potential of the story. He said to his 12 years younger colleague writer, "We have stumbled upon a very original plot. There is no second like it. It rarely happens. The plots are usually repetitive, especially the love ones. There are 5 to 6 schemes and one triangle, and that's it. A goat horn story is something pure, untouched by anybody. You can write on this plot a novella, even a real novel, but you are stuck in 4 pages. You have to write something much longer before someone steals your stuff." In my opinion, Andonov finds the key to the creative interpretation of the material not in his previous work, nor in Bulgarian or Eastern European cinema, but in a film by Ingmar Bergman. I mean The Virgin Spring from 1960. Of course, this is my personal opinion and something like research hypothesis insofar as there are no personal testimonies or memoir records. I haven't researched this assumption deeply yet, but I can share some of my thoughts. The evidences are in the comparison between the films themselves, and they are obvious to me. Bergman Films is also a rape and revenge drama. It's set in medieval Sweden, an epoch comparable to the 17th century in the Bulgarian lands. It is a tale about a father's merciless response to a rape and murder. In Bergman's film on his young daughter and in Andonov's on his young wife. The similarities in visual style and the expression of black and white cinematography are also significant. Of course, Bergman's film was first shown much later, unofficially in Bulgaria only to students and cinephiles, but Andonov has the opportunity to travel abroad. He had shot his spy film, There Is Nothing Better Than the Bad Weather, for a number of weeks in West Berlin in the year before he made The Goathorn. I dare to believe that he had a very clear idea of how the Bulgarian plot should be realized, so that the story would be highly evocative without seeming brutally naturalistic and regional, but with universal implications. As film concept, The Goathorn continues the discussions of key themes in The Virgin Spring, such as feelings of guilt, vengeance, the questioning of faith, and sexual innocence. Very strong motive in both movies are the father's possible feelings of incest towards their daughters. Another important issue is the conflict between paganism and Christianity, more clear, elaborated in Bergman's film and probably not so obvious in Metodi Andonov's. Actually, both fathers are staging their killings as ritualized pagan vengeance. In both movies, the water is very important symbol, in the same time Freudistic, but also in the meaning of the Christian religion. However, two types of interpretations of the Goathorn movie were the most relevant for the Bulgarian audience at the time. On the one hand, the film could be read as a kind of veiled critique of communist ideology and especially of its methods of educating the new men, particularly characteristic of the 50s and 60s. The basic principle of this educational theory are a total break with the personal past as if it contradicts the realization of the ideal, hatred of the enemies of communism, and ruthlessness in their destructions. These are also the emotional structures that the father wants to build in the character of his daughter, raising her as a man and teaching her to kill. Another much more simple interpretation, however, which is perceived quite directly and determines the film's mass viewing success, is the serving of nationalistic attitudes. These are stimulated by memories coming from history and literature about the 5 centuries of Ottoman rule, whose contemporary representatives are recognized in the neighboring Turkish state and the significant Muslim and Turkish-speaking minority in Bulgaria. Probably part of the concept of Metodi Andonov was to try, through his film, to join a discussion that was taking place unofficially and informally in Bulgarian intellectual and political circles. It refers to the politics of the ruling and only party in the country at that time, the Communist Party of Bulgaria, aimed at repressive and forced integration of Muslims, Turks in Pomaks, into Bulgarian society. The far-reaching strategic goal of the party establishment was, on the one hand, the complete unification of all socialist citizens, and on the other, the declaration of Bulgaria as a one national state and the nation as homogeneous in an ideological and ethnic sense. Metodi Andonov ultimately finds an impactful and compelling form to convey a vivid humanistic and universally valid message on all of the controversial issues his film raises. And this message consists in the all-conquering power of love, which has the most profound energy for individual transformation and for overcoming the contradictions between people. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Donev. What a wonderful conclusion as well, I must say. Now, I think that I have several questions, perhaps before we open the floor to questions from our participants. I like what you said about this transformative dimension of love, and that this is something that comes through in the film. I never thought of the comparison to the Virgin Spring, although a comparison to Bergman, you made very, very insightful and critical points. But I think there are some elements in the Goat Horn that to me strike me now when comparing with the Virgin Spring. Although Bergman is obviously classic in his own right, there's something in the Goat Horn that I think strikes much deeper when it comes to this kind of message.
Yes.
And it goes, and also aesthetically, I think it does a lot more. Bergman is sometimes on the border of moralizing, not in a bad way, but just I don't think it goes quite to the essence. Whereas here, what you said, in particular conclusion, I think that this film, The Goat Horn, that's what makes it really stand the test of time, and makes it such an enduring classic, if we can say, and a great film. But one question I had immediately thinking about this, and I like this point, it ties to what you were saying now. You mentioned the neglect of the spiritual. Now, I'm wondering whether in the context of Bulgarian cinema, we can open it up to the question afterwards of wider cinemas, Yugoslav cinema, Serbian cinema, and other like surrounding, whether from the surrounding countries or more widely world cinema. Do you think this is something that kind of persisted in Bulgarian cinema? Were there other films that dealt with spiritual subjects, or was this one of the films? Because you mentioned this, and I'm just wondering like how it worked, because obviously it was a communist regime after the Second World War, and this kind of sidelining or explicit persecution of faith and religion was something that was happening. So how does this reflect in the cinema? I mean, as someone who knows a lot, and as an expert in Bulgarian cinema.
Actually, the issues of faith and religions are not so common in Bulgarian cinema, especially in this classical period. Very close to the Goat Horn movie was another feature film based on a classical novel. I don't know the exact English translation, but in Bulgarian is the Iconostas. This is the
Iconostasis. Yeah, Iconostasis.
Yes, Iconostas.
The film.
Yes, it's a story about religious painter painting this iconostasis, but who is a real person. Actually, this movie is not so much about the faith and the religion, but much more about the contradiction, the resistance to the dogmatic that is in the religion. So in Bulgarian, this pure religion faith is not so common, even in the movies after this classical period. So in some aspects, the Goat Horn is a unique production, unique film in this aspect.
Wonderful, thank you. And do you think maybe if we compare also to other films that were made, whether on the subject, whether they're let's say, medieval epics, Bulgarian medieval epics, or also epics about the Ottoman occupation. How does like the Goat Horn, for those of us and those who haven't seen other such films like Bremeres Delno or Hanas Baruch, how does the Goat Horn stand in relation to these films? And is there some context for these other films that emerged, whether they were about the Ottoman occupation or whether they were epics about medieval Bulgarian rulers?
Yes. But in my opinion, the Goat Horn is again something that is more existential than representative for some depiction of the period, or it's not so much historical. But for me, that's why I also compared it with the Virgin Spring, because for me, in some way, the Goat Horn is more allegorical. It speaks more about the contemporary subject than about the time of the Ottoman ruling in Bulgaria. And actually, the movie, the Metodi Andonov films is discussing this nationalist and contradicting this nationalistic issues that actually in some way in film by Lyudmil Staikov, The Time of Violence, more in some way supporting these nationalistic attitudes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think the kind of existential dimension you brought out, that's wonderful. So whereas these other films, although I think they're quite significant, I mean, narratologically, historically.
They're big productions, they're wonderful representation of the skill of Bulgarian film industry, but as film works, the Goat Horn cannot be compared with them.
Thank you. I will open up, thank you very much. I'll open up the floor also now to questions if we have from our audience members. Yeah, please, if you have questions, feel free to join in and ask.
Hi, my name is Boris. Nice to meet you, Alexander. To begin with, The Goat Horn is one of my favorite films. It's definitely up there with Stalker, many Tarkovsky films, and Bellatar. I do understand what you said about Bergman, but I feel like Bergman rationalizes his point of view a lot more.
Yes, of course.
Whereas with The Goat Horn, I feel like you are kind of put into the scene of the family and you endure the pain as they endure it, and you follow their journey throughout. And obviously that one scene where they're riding through the forest, I think it's such a beautiful scene in any sort of film that I have seen personally. But my question to you is this: with regards to Bulgarian cinema, what impact does The Goat Horn have? Do you think that it has echoed through the ages as much as it should have? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, actually. It is always, it happens this way with all these big movies, big artworks that are standing alone. It's difficult to find some way of following of this type of artworks, and they're standing so very alone. They're something like hallmarks that are some kind of criteria for what you are doing in the cinema. And also it's for me it's also a matter of accidents, that everything happens so light and so easy at this movie. It was I know from the memories of the people that are close to the production, that it was shot for very short period of time. Everything got from so smoothly from his very easy, and this speaks also for the naturality of the idea and the movie making style of Metodi Andonov. It is also very interesting that he couldn't repeat this work in his following works. So
yeah, it is a shame that he only had such a short filmography.
yes, yes. Actually, after or probably this was so high level that he couldn't repeat it and couldn't come even closer to this one.
But do you think after this film, of course, after its success in Cannes Film Festival, do you think that that maybe put Bulgaria on the cinema map of the world? Do you think that was one of the pioneering films, or are there different ones that you can?
Actually, in my idea, the movie has not so big impact on the international audience that it should have, actually. In some countries, for example, in Spain, it was very, very well received, but not so good in the Nordic country, in France, and probably there was some, in some countries, probably it was read more politically and not right politically, because actually the film is against the political, the nationalistic attitudes and prejudices. But in some way, these ideas were put at first place by reading the movie, the film. It was actually unexpected from a country like Bulgaria, and this was also the problem. Actually, in the film world, it's very difficult. A long-standing movie to make a real breakthrough. You need a series, a wave of movies that can put some on the cinema map. This is not happening even now, when Bulgaria has, let's say, 3 or 4 very good movies in recent years. Even in this situation, it's hard to tell that Bulgarian is put already on the world cinema map.
Yeah. Sorry, I had another question as well. Yes. In terms of censorship, because obviously throughout the 70s, a lot of cinema was quite heavily censored. I'm amazed that it was accepted in Cannes. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how it got accepted, or maybe like a little bit of the background that we wouldn't normally hear?
Actually, the movie was in some way very good, recognized by the film authorities and by the government at this time. The reason
was that because it was anti-Ottoman?
In some way, but also for the previous film biography of Metodi Andonov. These previous movies based on Bogumil Rainov's novels, and he was an important cultural figure at this time, and he helped a lot for the recognition of Metodi Andonov's work in the Bulgarian system. And actually, in this time, I think, no, at this time, there was a selection committee at the Cannes Film Festival, and probably they liked the movie for the style, for the story, for the strong, for me, actors' work is one of the best in Bulgarian film history ever. So they recognized the film style, for me, the ideas, and probably they read the film right, not like actually the Bulgarian authorities. They think that they could use the film instrumentally for their ideas to homogenize the Bulgarian society.
You think that the film was used in that way to homogenize, to Yeah. Okay.
Yes, yes. For in my ideas, the movie was not correctly recognized by the audience. The first part, actually, the first two-thirds of the movie are very strong against actually and supporting the nationalistic attitudes, and the final one-third was something like I don't know, mostly like fairy tale, then like real uh, real history. This way, in my opinion, the movie was recognized at this time. So in my opinion, one of the problem, and this is also the problem of the system, not so much of the movie, that the film was not completely recognized by the Bulgarian society in his real meanings.
But how?
Yeah, I think you're right. Sorry. Thank you.
It's okay.
Thank you very much, Boris. Excellent questions. I had perhaps I ask you, well, connected to what Boris asked, is this how is the film recognized now? I mean, what is its status now? Because I think one of the things you say is like, you know, you mentioned nationalist attitudes, but what nationalist? I mean, in the context of Bulgarian communist society, now it's different, you know, with post-communist society. So I'm kind of also intrigued by this fact that, you know, there's a need, obviously, after, you know, 5 centuries of Ottoman occupation, to articulate to articulate a personal and historical position, you know, of the country in relation to its years of oppression, slavery, and so on, but at the same time to not, you know, to be critical essentially, but at the same time to avoid nationalism in its negative, in its most negative sense that is well known for. So, what kind of, perhaps those are 2 questions. How does it connect to, I mean, what nationalism in one sense, and then also what's the status of the film in Bulgaria now, in post-communist society?
I should mention that at this time, when this classical list of Bulgarian movies was issued, there was also some kind of competition at the Bulgarian National Television. Who is the best Bulgarian movie ever? And the main competitors were the Godhorn from one side and The Time of Violence by Ludmil Staikov. And actually the movie that won was Time of Violence. And this explains again that the Godhorn was, even in this post-communist time, not truly and fully recognized by the society. Actually, it's difficult to agree that by evaluation of this period, the love and mercy should prevail against the hatred and violence. So even now, we are not ready for the full message of the Godhorn.
Excellent. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think there's a good connection here to be made with another film. I mean, I've compared it before, but a film like Andrei Rublev, you know, obviously a lot of people know or speak about Tarkovsky, but in the context of the message it brings as well, in a similar vein, about love and faith and the endurance, you know, of faith and of love. That's something that's really interesting, and you know, it's always interesting to see how these films are interpreted and used anew, but how some of their most deepest and most important qualities are often missed when we talk about them in conversation. So that's a very good point. I have another question. Sorry to move on. I have another question. Please, Goran Rakic, please.
Good evening to everyone. Hi, Mr. Alexander. Thank you for the lecture and for your time. I wanted to ask you if you maybe can tell us something about the actors, which I think are great, both the role of a father, but Maria, especially about maybe something about the Katya Paskaleva. I don't know too much by myself, the reception of the role, or maybe some comments that appeared after the movie?
Yes, actually, this is the first big role for Katya Paskaleva and for Anton Gorchev, the father. They were well known, but not recognized at the real level that they deserved. Katya had before Gottshorn for previous 6-7 years, a dozen probably of small roles, and she was even not the first choice for Metodi Andonov. But she was the first choice for the writer of the story, for Nikolai Haitov, because she was part of the first adaptation from one of his short stories, the film End of the Song, that was produced the previous year before the Goldhorn. And actually in this movie, she played, this was not a big part, but this was the main female part in this movie. And the writer, Nikolai Haitov, was fascinated by the performance of Katya Paskaleva, and he was fighting for her till the last moment. And when Metodi Andonov accepted his choice, he made a great job with her in the movie. And actually in the next years, till the end of 80s, you can say, Katya Paskaleva was one of the big Bulgarian movie stars. Anton Gorchev has not so successful career. For him, actually the Goldhorn was the best ever that he made in cinema. But in the 70s, he has also a good actor career. Actually, in the next year, he played also the main part in another Bulgarian classic, the adaptation of one of the big Bulgarian classic novels, Ivan Kondarev. He played the title role of this teacher that was a figure that represented the struggles in Bulgarian society, middle of the 1920s, one of the most difficult period of Bulgarian history. So actually the Goldhorn movie opened the possibilities, the career for both main actors.
Thank you for beautiful information.
Thank you, Goran, very much. I would like to just add, because I think you picked up on this very nicely, that about the Bulgarian cinema tradition. And, you know, we sometimes look at it, especially if we're speaking from an English context. I mean, we're based in Scotland. So sometimes we look at it negatively, you know, the exposure of Bulgarian cinema. It's not something, as you said, that may not have been, you know, revealed or seen by people to its full extent outside Bulgaria, even to this day. But I think we can look at it from the other side as well, you know, from the English-speaking context and the world cinema context, how much is actually they're missing out. Because actually, you know, Bulgarian cinema dates to the very earliest years of silent cinema. So it's rife for discovery and to see kind of all the films from the silent era to present day and all the different innovations that took place. I wonder, perhaps for kind of our conclusion, because we didn't mention this, you touched upon this, but to draw it out a bit more, what's the kind of how did Bulgarian cinema develop? What are some of the, you know, key films, or perhaps the silent era? How does the silent era compare to films that came afterwards? Obviously with socialism as well, but what kind of films were made before, and how are they significant for our understanding of Bulgarian film history, but also film history more widely?
Actually, the silent era is not very, how to say, it was very difficult period for the Bulgarian filmmaking, because the industry was very weak. actually the most successful movies nationally was literary adaptations on works that were very important for the Bulgarian history and for Bulgarian audience, but they are not very, how to say, innovative as film style, as cinematography, as film art, compared to the trends in European cinema in the 20s and 30s. So the Bulgarian silent cinema is more important for the Bulgarian national film culture and for the establishing, for building a film audience, for building a national film audience. And actually the results, the fruits of this process were very visible in the 60s and 70s, because this tradition for the national cinema, for the cinema opened and looking for national audience had their best representation in the 60s and 70s. At this period, Bulgaria was one of the countries with the most highest rate of cinema viewership in whole world. More than 15, 16 admissions per capita for a year. That's one of the biggest results at this period, maybe behind a Soviet Union and India at this time.
Thank you very much. I think yes, I'm very excited kind of that you spoke about this. And perhaps a question just to finish, if we actually, I'll ask if anybody, does anybody else have any other questions, perhaps before I ask a final one and we close. Right. Well, if anybody else does, please raise your hand or send me a message. But yes.
Hi. Hello. Yeah. It's not a question. It's more of an invitation. Alexander, if you would like to join, because me and Mina organized the St. Andrews Film Festival, and I know that Goran is also a part of it this year. If you're interested to come along, there are a good selection of Bulgarian films this year as well. And Mina, I think, can send you the link to the website.
Yes, of course, with pleasure.
It would be an honor to have you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Good. It's a recent selection from the last years.
Yeah, 2020, 2021.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
You have also Danny Legend got in your selection.
Pardon?
By Yavor Petkov.
No. They're new talent cinema. So we have
yes,
like we have Musa, we have Oxymoron of Eternity, and One Elevator Apart. I don't know if you know them. They're
yes. I watched them on our National Film Festival.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, you're welcome to join.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Boris, this ties to maybe my final question, but yes, it's wonderful. I was actually going to also invite, so thank you, Boris, for saying, yes, we curated the program and we'll be showing also Smiren by Svetozar Draganov.
Yes, by Svetozar Draganov. Yes, I know. Yes, I will join a pleasure discussion on this movie. Excellent.
So we'll do a panel that in the forthcoming weeks. Actually, the festival starts next week, but basically that's also, I guess, my final question. What's the kind of opportunity, because we spoke a little bit about that before we started this, when it comes to film teaching in Bulgaria, how is it, done, like when it comes to film history? Because what I think, at least from my perspective, I see sometimes an advantage in teaching in a film, let's say in Serbia or in Bulgaria, because often you have the teaching of cinemas from the countries, like from former Yugoslavia, from Bulgaria, from Romania, as well as all the cinemas of the West, if we can say it like that, French cinema, American cinema, and so on. Whereas when sometimes we discover, or at least in my own experience, when we've done teaching a film here or in Scotland, it's often, more Western European cinemas, and very rarely do you get a glimpse into the sometimes you get some Czech cinema, or you get a little bit of Czechoslovak cinema, I should say, or you get a little bit of Yugoslav Black Wave or things like that, but not a very detailed or in-depth engagement with the potential and really the history of world cinema. So I wonder how it is in Bulgaria, and perhaps how is also the state of the industry now. Connected two questions, I guess. Potential for future.
Yes, it's not an easy situation. In my opinion, there is lacking a lot of knowledge about even about the national film history. I had a week ago a course about, let's say, sociology based on examples from the Bulgarian film history. So I'm choosing a selection of 5-6 movies, and through the analysis of these movies, I'm talking about the transformation of the Bulgarian society. And from the, let's say, beginning, middle of 60s, starting with Monday Morning, and at the end stand the lesson by Kristina Grozeva and Peter Valchanov. And I was a little bit surprised that very few of the students have seen some of these movies. In the selection were Monday Morning, All for Love by Nikolai Volev, also Roof by Ivan Andonov, The Only Witness by Mikhail Pandursky, the only movie awarded at the Venice Film Festival in the 1990. And actually, even our national film history is not very well known by the film students. So, but this is not so much problem of the students, then of and not only of the teaching system, but also of many institutions that are not so much interested in presenting the history of the Bulgarian cinema. And I think even the national television is showing very, very small selection of movies, repeating them over time, and not doing a good and how to say analytical selection of examples that can explain the real development of the Bulgarian film and the Bulgarian filmmaking style. And this is also actually, I think I'm observing that our film students are taking more from international film examples than from the national film history. And in my opinion, this is not a very good way of developing the national cinema.
I agree 100%. I think there needs to be, this is one of the kind of aims we do in terms of representation of world cinema heritage. This is something that really needs to, change, and we need to work on. So I'm glad there's, opportunity for development and more work to be done, because I would definitely like to see more people, at least in my own part, engaged with Bulgarian cinema and the kind of really long and incredible cinematic tradition that goes all the way to the silent era, because I think we can discover a lot. So I'm grateful that you joined us here today. Thank you. We will publish your, this is just an announcement for everybody. Once you send us your essay, we will publish the new essay on the Goat Horn around the end of this month or so, in the next couple of weeks. And yes, as Boris mentioned earlier, for those who would like to join, we're doing the St. Andrews Film Festival, which starts from the 22nd. It will be online on a pass basis, and you'll be able to watch the films. We have an excellent international selection And also Goran, who joined a few weeks ago in our previous masterclass, his film The Light will also be showing in the short film competition. So thank you, Goran, again, and thank you for joining tonight. And most of all, thank you, Professor Donev, for sharing with us your
Thank you for the invitation.
knowledge. Thank you, and experience. And
thank you so much.
Thank you. Hopefully we see you next time in Sofia.
Yes, with pleasure.
Thank you.
See you,
Thank you.
and good success.
Thank you. We will start also for anybody who wants to join. This is just also for tonight because this is our closing night of the film series. In about an hour's time, we'll also do another panel on Korean cinema, new Korean cinema, starting from 8 o'clock. So for those who would like to join, you'll have the link in the description and everything. And thank you, Professor Donev, again.
Thank you. Thank you.